Hello everyone, this is Professor Hasselman. This is World History 107. And today we're going to talk about the 20th and 21st centuries as a new period. Now the 20th century meets the two basic definitions of a new period. Themes dominant in the previous period are no longer dominant, and major new themes start to surface. Now the 20th century divides into three subperiods. The decades dominated by world wars and depression, the post-war years, highlighted by decolonization and the Cold War, and now almost two post-Cold War decades. Beginning with World War I, the military and political dominance of the West began to erode. Two of the themes that had most clearly shaped the long 19th century. The world wars greatly weakened the West, accelerating international demands for independence. In even the West's economic dominance, though more clearly sustained, began to be qualified by two competitors, particularly from the Pacific Rim. Now, as old themes faded, new ones surfaced. Politically, almost every regime operating in 1900 was replaced at least once. The decline of monarchy and empire was striking. Simultaneously, the landholding aristocracy was displaced by the preeminent social class. New types of warfare and space travel might also be advanced as defining themes, though to date, some caution might be warranted here. The two leading new themes to which every major society had to react were unprecedented global population growth and the new technological and organizational capacity for global contacts. Now, population explosion and its attendant migration had obvious political and environmental effects, helping to unseat older regimes. A steady stream of connective technologies supported the emergence of new organizational forms, such as the multinational corporation. These themes supplanted the preeminence of the West in shaping the new world history era. Now, the contemporary period presents challenges to world history teaching. As we look at developments over the past century, we must be careful to maintain contact with earlier patterns, with characteristics of the individual major civilizations, and with earlier processes in world history. In studying change in the contemporary period, we risk ignoring the fact that this period does not stand in isolation to the past. Now, although the contemporary period is new, some features such as cultural, political, economic, and military power of the West are carryovers from the long 19th century and even earlier. The world economy also persisted in some ways, and modernization blossomed further in this period. Two key issues in dealing with the contemporary period involve the currency and complexity of developments over the past century, and the fact that we do not know the end of the story. We can point to changes from patterns in the long 19th century, but we cannot always say that new patterns are well established, and we cannot make final determinations about new directions. The 20th and early 21st centuries are usually divided into three phases. The years 1914 to 1945 were dominated by two world wars, the Depression, disarray in Western society, stirrings in other societies, and the force of new revolutions, particularly in the Soviet Union. The years 1945 to 1900 were marked by 1990 were marked by the Cold War, which provides an alternative to the main frame of reference that applied to the World War and interwar period. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, we enter the third phase of the contemporary era, marked perhaps by the emergence of the United States as the world's only superpower, along with some questions about how long that role would last. The two world wars posed new questions about the Western role in the world, particularly the Western European role. We see a decline of Western Europe in world affairs, particularly after World War II. This decline opened a transitional framework in which the Soviet Union and the United States disputed world dominance. That transitional system failed and the Cold War became a first statement about how to address the shifting world power balance. In the third phase of the contemporary era, we are involved in more open-ended questions about what the new power structure will be. It's important to remember that the contemporary period is still a recent one in world history. Some of the details have yet to be worked out, and some of the new themes have yet to be fully established. What are the new themes in the contemporary period? The dominant social class in most societies in 1900 or 1914 was still the landed aristocracy. By the early 21st century, the aristocracy is almost gone, replaced by a new kind of professional middle class. This social class thinks of the world more in industrial than in agricultural terms, more in urban terms than in rural, and more in managerial structures than in terms of private land ownership. In 1900 or 1910, the world's major political regimes were predominantly monarchies or empires, but these systems are largely gone in the early 21st century. The alternatives include democracy, along with authoritarian regimes and communist systems. Gender relationships also seem to enter a new phase in the contemporary era. Older systems of patriarchy were modified by efforts to give women the vote, improve their educational levels, and provide them with some legal rights. The gender system that would replace the patriarchal system, however, has not been clearly defined. The new system is not completely egalitarian and does not fully address women's economic role or the issue of male violence against women. The contemporary period is partly defined by shifts in gender relations, but the themes here have not been fully established. The contemporary period offers a new set of challenges to older cultural beliefs. These challenges come from communism, a greater mass appeal of nationalism, consumerism, and science. In important ways, these cultural options do not entirely agree with one another, and by the early 21st century, these options had not fully succeeded in displacing the old. The cultural map of the contemporary period is complicated. We cannot say for sure that the older patterns have been vanquished. Now, in defining the contemporary period, we must look at the shift away from dominant patterns in the long 19th century and to some extent aspects of the early modern period. We begin by looking at the relative decline of the West, for which we see evidence beginning in World War I. Both world wars, apart from their global dimensions, can be seen as a giant internal civil war within the West. In this conflict, the West's inability to maintain its power position in the world accelerated as a result of the economic, political, and population damage Western societies inflicted on one another. The measurements of relative decline important here are found in the military and in the West's capacity to control most other parts of the world. In the early 21st century, the West still possessed the greatest military power in the world as a whole, but the capacity of the West to move almost at will militarily had been curtailed by the second half of the 20th century. One reason for this was that Western countries became less willing to invest heavily in maintaining cutting-edge military technologies. Several other parts of the world began to emphasize military tactics that could stalemate the West's advantage in conventional armament, such as guerrilla warfare in Vietnam or the resistance in urban settings seen in Algeria and Iraq. As individual countries gained independence and a measure of economic success, they invested in military force. The West could still defeat such countries, but doing so took much more planning and economic commitment than previously. We also see decline in the West's capacity to control most of the rest of the world directly through colonies and colonial administrations. One key development in the contemporary period, starting between the wars and accelerating after World War II, was decolonization. Western political and economic influence could survive decolonization in some cases, but the world as a whole saw a much reduced capacity of any single civilization or society to dominate global politics. Some people argued that the relative decline of the West will ultimately yield predominance to another civilization, but there is no inherent reason that a pattern of successive dominance must repeat itself. Several other themes began to gain ascendancy in the contemporary period. In future centuries, people may see the fundamental innovation of the contemporary period as the beginning of humankind's conquest of outer space. In the early 21st century, however, space exploration has not yet had a deep impact on human life or the patterns of global societies. Another candidate for the contemporary period's fundamental innovation is the altered nature of war and military technologies in the 21st century. The two world wars introduced the concept of total war, the mobilization of all the major resources of the key combatants, not just armies and navies, but the economy and civilians as well. World War II gave birth to the capability to end human existence with nuclear weapons. Among these themes of the contemporary era were the tightened organizational capacity in war, society's insistence on total surrender as a result of their investment, and the threat of devastating and fearsome new technology. Another theme of the contemporary period is massive global population increase. This population growth carries over into other features that begin to reshape the world. World population explosion encourages new patterns of immigration, bringing together people from different cultural backgrounds and leading to new challenges in many societies. Population explosion also places unprecedented stress on global environments. The final defining theme involves the steady acceleration of communication and transportation technologies. Important developments here include radio, satellite communications, the internet, and air travel. These technologies offer unprecedented opportunities and in some ways pose unprecedented threats and challenges to the identities of individual societies. The accelerated movement of ideas, goods, and peoples, sometimes referred to as globalization, is an indisputable mark of the new period of world history. In the next lecture, we will turn to changes in the world economy, where we will find echoes of the themes we've discussed here, and again, significant change to certainty about the outcomes. So this is History 107 with Professor Hasselman, and this has been the discussion on some new themes or the new periods of the 21st and the 20th and the 21st centuries.